You know what's funny about rich people? They never see the trap until it's too late. Not the financial traps. Mind you, they usually have enough lawyers and accountants to dance around those. No, I'm talking about the traps of their own making. The ones forged from pride, entitlement, and a complete blindness to anything beyond their gilded cages. I've seen it countless times, from the jungle trails of Vietnam to the gleaming towers of Wall Street. And now, here I was, watching it unfold at my own daughter's wedding reception. The air in the grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Crystal chandeliers dripped light on a polished mahogany and the silk of designer gowns. It was a spectacle, an elaborate performance of wealth and influence. And I, Arthur Henderson, felt about as comfortable as a bull in a china shop. I was wearing the best suit I owned, a charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, but still, to their eyes, distinctly un-designer. My hands, calloused from years of gripping saw handles and sandpaper, felt heavy at my sides. They were carpenter's hands, plain and simple, and to this crowd, that was a brand of shame. I watched Jenna from across the room. She looked radiant, as beautiful as her mother, Elizabeth, had been. The white dress, the perfectly styled hair, the sparkle in her eyes, it was everything a father could wish for his daughter. And yet, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Her happiness felt brittle, a performance within a performance. She laughed a little too loud at her new husband's jokes, held his arm a little too tightly. She was trying so hard to fit into their world, the world of the Thorns, that she was losing herself. And, more importantly, she was losing sight of who I was. Braden Thorne, her husband, stood beside her, a smug, patrician smile plastered across his face. He was everything I wasn't, tall, handsome in a chiseled, arrogant way, with the kind of smooth hands that had never known an honest day's work. His family, the illustrious Thorns of Beacon Hill, were old Boston money, though their empire, Thorne Industries, was, I suspected, more facade than foundation these days. I'd done my homework, of course. Not that anyone here would expect old Art Henderson, the quiet carpenter from outside Boston, to have done homework on them. I kept my distance for most of the evening, a shadow in the opulent room. It wasn't hard. People like the Thorns, they looked through people like me. I was just the father of the bride, a necessary, if slightly embarrassing, accessory. I heard whispers, saw the curious, slightly disdainful glances. He's a carpenter, you know, someone would murmur. Runs a small shop out in Lexington. The subtext was always clear. What on earth did Jenna see in him? How could she come from such a humble background? My humble background was a choice, one made after Elizabeth's death, a desperate attempt to ground myself, to simplify a life that had become too complex, too dangerous. My millions, my $33 million locked away in various trusts and investments, were a painful reminder of a past I tried to bury. A past where I was a different man, a colder man, a man who understood the cutthroat world of finance far better than any Thorne ever would. The carpentry was my penance, my quiet refuge, a place where things were tangible, honest, where you saw the results of your labor. It was a lie, yes, but it was a comfortable one, a necessary one, I'd told myself, to protect Jenna from the very darkness that money could bring. But now, watching her, I wondered if my silence had been a mistake. Had my desire for anonymity, my refusal to flaunt my true wealth, inadvertently taught her all the wrong lessons? Had it taught her to value appearance over substance? To despise the very hands that had built her a life? The moment came, as all wedding speeches do. Braden's best man delivered a series of utterly forgettable anecdotes. Then Braden himself took the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension as he thanked his parents, his new in-laws, a quick, dismissive nod to my table, and then, with a flourish, his beautiful bride. He painted a picture of a glamorous future, a life of endless possibilities, carefully omitting any mention of the precarious state of Thorne Industries. I saw him glance at me then, a flicker of triumph in his eyes, as if to say, "Look what I'm taking from you, old man." Then it was Jenna's turn. She looked out at the assembled guests, her eyes shining, a carefully rehearsed smile on her lips. She thanked the Thorns effusively for welcoming her into their wonderful family. She thanked Braden for showing her what true ambition and success look like. And then she turned to me. My heart hitched. A foolish, hopeful part of me believed she might say something, anything, to bridge the growing chasm between us. Something real. Her smile thinned. Her voice, usually soft, hardened just a fraction. And of course, she began, her gaze sweeping over me with a dismissive air. My father, Arthur. He's always been a simple man. A carpenter. She paused, letting the word hang in the air like an insult. He taught me that you don't need to chase after wealth, because you'll never really achieve anything great anyway. The air left my lungs. The knot in my stomach tightened into a vice. I saw Braden at her side, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, a silent victory. Jenna continued, oblivious to the wound she was carving into my soul. I just hope Braden can teach me that sometimes you can and should dream bigger than a simple working life. 11 words. 11 words that sealed their fate. The polite applause that followed sounded like thunder in my ears. The world seemed to tilt. My daughter, my sweet Jenna, whom I had raised alone, sacrificing everything, had just publicly branded me a failure. A simple man who never achieved anything. The lie I had lived, the shield I had worn to protect her, had been turned into a weapon against me. A lifetime of discipline, of suppressing emotion, of analytical detachment, kicked in. The world around me blurred, but the faces of Jenna and Braden remained in sharp, unforgiving focus. I remembered Elizabeth, her gentle smile, her fierce belief in truth and honor. Never let injustice stand, Art, she used to say. It eats away at the soul. Something clicked inside me. A switch, buried deep under years of carefully constructed quietude, flipped. The gentle, unassuming carpenter vanished, replaced by the man who had survived a war, built an empire, and learned to read people like an open book. My hands, the hands she'd dismissed, clenched under the table. They weren't just carpenter's hands. They were the hands of a man who had built fortunes, broken enemies, and, if necessary, could dismantle an empire piece by bloody piece. My eyes, which had been kindly tired, now became shards of steel. I rose from my seat, slowly, deliberately. No one noticed. No one ever did. But they would. Oh, they would. And they would learn, very soon, that the simple man had been far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The polished marble floor of the Copley Plaza reception hall felt suddenly unstable beneath my feet. My perfectly tailored suit, once a symbol of an attempt to meet them halfway, now felt like a uniform of humiliation. I walked away from the clamor, the music, the forced laughter, a ghost passing through the celebration. Not one head turned. Not one voice called out. A few of the catering staff, keenly observant in their own quiet way, might have noticed, but they were paid to be invisible, just like I had been. Outside, the cool Boston air hit me like a splash of cold water. It was a late spring evening, the kind where the promise of summer was still a whispered secret. I walked past valet attendants who ignored me, their eyes scanning for luxury cars and bigger tips. My own car, a meticulously maintained but utterly unremarkable 2008 Honda Accord, waited patiently in a nearby parking garage. I preferred it that way. Inconspicuous. Reliable. Like me. Or at least, the version of me I presented to the world. The drive home, usually a soothing transition from the day's work to the quiet solitude of my house in Lexington, was a blur of traffic lights and choked back rage. Her words echoed in the enclosed space of the car, each one a fresh sting. Simple man, carpenter, never achieve anything great, dream bigger than a simple working life. It wasn't just the insult. It was the venom behind it, the public nature of the humiliation, the sheer unadulterated ingratitude. And the worst part? It wasn't just Jenna talking. It was Braden. It was the Thorns. It was their entitlement, their hollow superiority, poisoning my daughter's mind. They had taken the quiet dignity I had chosen, the peace I had painstakingly built and twisted it into a caricature of failure. They had used my silence, my humility, against me. A flicker of Elizabeth's face crossed my mind, her bright eyes, her empathetic smile. What would Elizabeth say, Art? I asked myself, the familiar question a balm, but also an accelerant to the fire within me. She would be heartbroken. She would be furious. And then she would be resolute. She was the one who taught me the difference between turning the other cheek and allowing yourself to be walked all over. There's a line, Art, she used to say, her hand warm in mine, and when they cross it, you have every right to defend what's yours. Your honor, your peace, your family. They had crossed the line. They had not merely insulted me. They had trampled on the very values I had tried to instill in Jenna, values I had learned, often painfully, during my younger years. My wealth, the $33 million that sat in offshore accounts and meticulously managed portfolios, wasn't just money. It was a legacy, a burden, and a testament to a life far more complex and brutal than any of them could ever imagine. I had kept it hidden for a reason, a very good, very painful reason. My simple working life was a carefully constructed fortress designed to keep out the very kind of predators I now saw in the thorns. But now, that fortress had been breached from within by my own daughter, wielding the words of my enemies. My quiet life as a carpenter wasn't an admission of defeat. It was a retreat from a world that had nearly consumed me after Elizabeth's death. It was my way of finding solace, of trying to raise Jenna away from the avarice and ruthlessness that had once defined my existence. But now that choice, that deliberate humility, was being used to diminish me, to make me seem less than. I pulled into my driveway, the old colonial house, nestled among mature oaks, a beacon of quiet normalcy. No sprawling estate, no flashy cars. Just a home. My home. The garage door rumbled open, revealing my perfectly organized workshop, the scent of sawdust, linseed oil, and freshly cut pine, a familiar comfort. Tonight, it offered no solace. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The silence of the house, usually a source of peace, felt heavy, accusing. I walked into my study, a room rarely used for anything beyond reading or paying bills. Tonight, it would become a command center. I sat at my old oak desk, the same one I'd built for Elizabeth years ago. My fingers, still trembling slightly from the raw emotion, reached for my phone. I scrolled to a contact I rarely used, Sam White, legal. Samantha White, a sharp, brilliant young lawyer I'd quietly put through law school after a chance encounter years ago. She didn't know the full extent of my resources, but she knew enough to know I wasn't just Art Henderson, the carpenter. She was loyal, discreet, and possessed a quiet ferocity that I deeply admired. I took a deep breath, the last vestiges of raw anger giving way to a cold, crystalline resolve. The kind of resolve that had served me well in the jungles of Southeast Asia, in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. The kind that had built fortunes and dismantled empires. I dialed. The phone rang twice before her crisp, professional voice answered. Sam White. Sam, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. It's Art Henderson. A brief pause. Mr. Henderson. It's late. Everything all right? Her tone was concerned, alert. No, Sam, I replied, staring out into the inky blackness of my backyard. Everything is far from all right. I have a job for you. A very personal job, and a very expensive one. I paused, letting the implications sink in. My daughter's fiancé just sealed his fate with 11 words. And I need you to help me show him and his entire family exactly what nothing looks like when it's taken from them. I need you to help me clean house. Every single skeleton, every single dirty secret. I want them all. I could almost hear her processing the gravity of my tone, the underlying steel that rarely surfaced. Mr. Henderson, she said, slowly, are we talking about a simple legal dispute, or something more comprehensive? Comprehensive, Sam, affirmed, a grim smile touching my lips. I want to dismantle an empire, piece by piece, and I want to make sure my daughter, for all her misguided beliefs, understands the difference between true wealth and manufactured status. There are some mistakes that cost a man nearly everything, Sam, and some lessons that must be learned, no matter the price. I'm done being quiet, and I'm done being underestimated. The ghost of Elizabeth's smile, gentle and knowing, seemed to approve. My silence had ended. The game had begun. The next morning, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in my kitchen was a stark contrast to the burning intensity of my resolve. It was early, well before dawn, my usual time for quiet contemplation and planning. But today, the contemplation was sharper, the plans more intricate, the stakes immeasurably higher. I was no longer just Art Henderson, the carpenter. I was Art Henderson, the architect of a very deliberate, very personal demolition. Samantha White arrived precisely at 7 a.m., looking as sharp and composed as she always did, even this early. She wore a tailored pantsuit, her red hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, usually bright with youthful optimism, held a touch of sober curiosity. She carried a sleek laptop bag and a legal pad, ready for war. I met her at the door, a steaming mug of coffee in my hand. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," she greeted, her voice low. She knew this wasn't a social call. "Sam, come in," I said, leading her to my study. I hadn't changed anything since last night. The room still had the scent of old books and quiet purpose. I gestured to a comfortable leather armchair opposite my desk. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," I began, sitting down. "I appreciate your discretion." "Of course," she replied, her gaze sweeping over the room, taking in the framed photographs. One of Elizabeth, radiant and smiling, another of a younger Jenna, laughing on my shoulders. "You mentioned dismantling an empire. You're not being metaphorical, are you?" "Hardly," I confirmed, a dry amusement in my voice. "The Thorns. Braden, his parents, their company, Thorn Industries. I want every single thread, every skeleton in every closet, every debt, every questionable transaction, every disgruntled partner, every frustrated employee. I want it all laid bare, and I want you to start digging officially and unofficially." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Unofficially, Mr. Henderson? That's beyond the usual scope of corporate due diligence." I leaned forward, my hands resting on the desk. "Sam, let me be clear. What they did yesterday was more than a slight. It was a public humiliation, an act of calculated contempt designed to diminish me, and by extension, to diminish my daughter's heritage, the values I try to teach her. I believe they intend to use Jenna, her youth, her connections, perhaps even her vulnerability, to prop up their failing enterprise. I will not allow that." I saw the wheels turning in her sharp legal mind. She was processing the depth of my anger, the cold precision in my tone. "And your resources for this, Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice cautious. She knew I had money, but not how much. "Unlimited," I stated simply. "Consider it a blank check. Whatever you need, investigators, forensic accountants, legal teams. But more importantly, Sam, you need to understand who you're working for. I'm not just Art Henderson, the carpenter." I paused, gathering my thoughts. It was time to pull back the curtain, at least a little. Before Elizabeth passed, before I found solace in building things with my hands, I was a different man. My past isn't just about wood and sawdust, Sam. It's about strategy, about reading people, about understanding systems, vulnerabilities, and how to exploit them. I rose and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick, leather-bound album. "You see this?" I opened it to a faded photograph of a young man in a Marine Corps uniform, a fierce intensity in his eyes. It was me decades ago in Vietnam. I served in Marine Force Recon, Special Operations. You learn a few things there about anticipating your enemy, about finding the weak points, about achieving objectives through unconventional means when necessary. I turned another page, showing her a picture of a younger me, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, standing in front of a fledgling tech startup sign in a garage in Palo Alto. After the Corps, I found myself in a different kind of jungle. Silicon Valley, early 90s. The dot-com boom. Everyone thought I was just some lucky stumblebum who got in at the right time. But luck is rarely a substitute for meticulous research, calculated risk, and a deep understanding of market dynamics. I closed the album, my gaze meeting hers. I became what they call a venture capitalist, an angel investor. I didn't just invest money, Sam. I invested knowledge. I mentored founders. I saw patterns where others saw chaos. And I made a fortune, a very considerable fortune. Not because I was greedy, but because I was good. And because Elizabeth pushed me, believed in me, tempered my ruthlessness with compassion. My voice softened as I spoke her name. After she died, tragically, in an accident that was indirectly tied to my growing public profile and the cutthroat nature of that business, I pulled back. Drastically. I liquidated assets, diversified, moved the bulk of my wealth into untouchable trusts, and disappeared. I became this simple carpenter. My way of grieving. My way of protecting Jenna from that world. Sam was silent, her expression a mix of awe and understanding. So, the $33 million wasn't an exaggeration then. It's a conservative estimate, I confirmed, and it's all at your disposal. I want you to understand that what we're about to do isn't about petty revenge. It's about justice. It's about protecting my daughter, even from her own misguided choices, and holding these people accountable for their arrogance and their deceit. They don't respect hard work. They don't respect honor. They only respect power, and I intend to show them mine. Her eyes hardened. Understood, Mr. Henderson. Where do I start? Start with the public records? I instructed. SEC filings, corporate registries, property deeds, lawsuits, bankruptcies. Look for any inconsistencies, any unusual cash flows, any sudden acquisitions or disposals. Then, once you have the public face, we'll move to the shadows. I'll give you access to a separate, untraceable fund for private investigators. And there's one other person you'll need to work with. I picked up my other phone, a burner I kept for sensitive contacts. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. Morgan. Jake, I said, a slight warmth entering my voice. It's Art. A beat of silence. Then a chuckle. Well, Art Henderson. Didn't think I'd hear from you unless the world was ending, or you needed a very particular kind of splinter removed. Something like that. Old friend, I replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. The world isn't ending, but someone's about to learn a very expensive lesson. I need you to dust off your contacts. I need you to start shaking some trees. I need you to turn over every rock in Boston and see what scuttles out from under the Thorne family. Thorns, huh? Jake mused. Old money, but I hear they're bleeding green these days. What did they do? They insulted my daughter, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. And then they insulted me. Publicly. At her wedding. And I believe they intend to use her as a pawn in their schemes. You know what that means. Another pause. Ah, Jake said, a note of grim understanding in his voice. The calm smile. The one my old unit used to know meant someone was about to learn a very painful lesson. Consider it done, Art. Send me the details. And introduce me to your lawyer. We've got work to do. I hung up, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. The pieces were in motion. The simple carpenter was gone. The strategist, the investor, the marine was back. And the Thorns, in their arrogance, had no idea what was coming for them. The next few weeks became a blur of hushed phone calls, encrypted emails, and clandestine meetings. My simple carpentry shop, in Lexington, usually filled with the comforting hum of a table saw and the scent of cedar, subtly transformed. It still served its purpose as a functional workshop. I made sure of that, meticulously crafting custom cabinets and furniture for local clients. It was part of the charade, a necessary distraction. But beneath the veneer of sawdust and woodworking tools, the real work was unfolding. Sam and Jake became my hands and eyes, extending my reach into the darkest corners of Boston's financial and social underworld. Sam, with her legal prowess, delved into the public-facing aspects of Thorne Industries. SEC filings, annual reports, property records, and a bewildering array of corporate subsidiaries and shell companies. Jake, on the other hand, operated in the shadows. His network, forged during his decades as a private investigator and before that, in places we rarely spoke about, was vast and surprisingly effective. He knew how to find the disgruntled former employees, the overlooked mistresses, the desperate business partners, and the whispers that never made it into official records. "Mr. Henderson," Sam reported during one of our daily encrypted video calls, her voice tight with professional excitement. "Thorn Industries is less of an empire and more of a house of cards built on quicksand. Their balance sheets are creative, to put it mildly. There are significant discrepancies between their reported assets and liabilities. They're leveraged to the hilt, using shell companies to mask debt, and their cash flow is a constant struggle. They've been aggressively selling off non-core assets, but at fire sale prices indicating a desperate need for liquidity." I listened, my eyes closed for a moment, visualizing the financial landscape she described. It was precisely what I had suspected. The kind of superficial grandeur the Thorns displayed always came with a hidden cost. They valued appearances more than substance, and that was always a recipe for disaster. "Are there any obvious red flags that would catch the attention of regulators?" "Oh, absolutely," Sam replied, a dry amusement in her tone. "Several. Particularly a series of intercompany loans that are suspiciously opaque and some questionable transactions involving a Cayman Islands entity. They've been very clever, but not clever enough to fool a dedicated team with unlimited resources. We're also seeing evidence of significant related party transactions benefiting the Thorns personally at the expense of the company. Classic old money greed, trying to shore up personal fortunes as the company falters." "Excellent," I murmured. "Keep digging. Find the legal pressure points. The ones that can trigger investigations, audits, and shareholder lawsuits." Meanwhile, Jake's findings were equally illuminating, though far grittier. "Art," he reported in a gravelly voice over a secure line, "Braden's not just a pretty face. He's been actively involved in some of their shadier dealings. Seems he's got a gambling problem, discreetly of course, but substantial. And he's been taking out personal loans against company assets without proper disclosure. Also, there's a rumor he's been quietly divesting some of his personal stock in Thorn Industries, right before some of these bad news asset sales. That looks like insider trading to me, or at least a highly unethical move for someone about to take the reins." "Insider trading," I repeated, a cold satisfaction spreading through me. "That's a felony, Jake. Federal. Keep digging into that. Give me solid evidence, not just rumors." "Already on it," he assured me. "And there's something else. Braden and Victor Thorn, the father, they've been trying to push through a massive new development project. High-end condos on the waterfront. It's their Hail Mary, the one they hope will turn everything around. They're cutting corners, Art. Big time, using substandard materials, shady contractors, and there are whispers of environmental violations being quietly swept under the rug. This detail hit me harder than the financial shenanigans. Cutting corners on construction, endangering people for profit, that was abhorrent. That was a direct affront to everything I believed in, everything I stood for as a carpenter, a builder. My simple working life might have seemed beneath them, but it was founded on integrity, on the principle of building something strong and true. "Find me the details on that project, Jake," I commanded, my voice sharper now. "Every single detail. Permits, subcontractors, environmental impact assessments. I want to know exactly how they're planning to gamble with people's lives and the city's future." My internal monologue shifted from pure strategic calculation to a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my dignity anymore. It was about exposing a rot that went far deeper than a few snide remarks at a wedding. The Thorns weren't just arrogant, they were predatory. They were cancer. I also couldn't shake the nagging worry about Jenna. Had she seen any of this? Did she suspect the true nature of the man she had married? My heart ached at the thought of her caught in their web. I didn't want to destroy her life, only to rip away the veil that obscured her vision. She needed to see them for who they truly were, before she became irrevocably entangled in their schemes. That was the delicate balance I had to strike, justice for them and salvation for her. One afternoon, I received an anonymous tip, orchestrated by Jake, that Thorn Industries was desperately seeking a major investor to inject capital into their failing ventures. particularly the waterfront development. They were looking for a white knight, someone who could save them from imminent collapse. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. They're looking for a white knight? I thought. Oh, they'll get a knight? All right. Just not the one they're expecting. This was it. The opportunity to not just expose them, but to actively participate in their downfall, using their own desperation against them. I would play their game, but with rules they didn't understand and a dealer they vastly underestimated. I would become their savior, only to reveal myself as their executioner. It was a risky move, but one that resonated with the old Marine in me. Sometimes, you had to get inside the enemy's perimeter to truly dismantle their defenses. Sam, I called her, my voice low and urgent. Start preparing for an acquisition. A hostile one, if necessary. I want to acquire controlling interest in Thorn Industries, or at least enough to bring them to their knees. And make sure no one, absolutely no one, knows who the ultimate beneficial owner is. Are you serious, Mr. Henderson? She asked, a gasp in her voice. That's a massive undertaking. And expensive. I told you, Sam. I reminded her, my resources are unlimited, and my resolve is absolute. It's time to stop just observing the shifting sands. It's time to cause an earthquake. The calm smile my construction crews knew meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson. This lesson, however, was going to be priceless. My workshop, a sanctuary of sawdust and precise angles, was now my war room. The workbench, usually home to blueprints for bespoke furniture, was cluttered with financial reports, legal documents, and a detailed topographical map of Boston's waterfront development project, marked with Jake's meticulous notes. Sam sat across from me, her laptop open, its screen a dizzying array of spreadsheets and legal precedents. Jake, ever the shadow, stood by the wall, arms crossed, his gaze sharp and unwavering. All right, I began, my voice calm, but with an underlying edge that both of them recognized. We have the intelligence. Thorn Industries is a house of cards, inflated by debt, propped up by deceit, and led by men whose arrogance far outweighs their acumen. Braden is actively engaging in questionable financial practices bordering on criminal, and the entire family is trying to use Jenna to secure a lifeline for their dying company. I paused, letting the words sink in. My objective remains twofold. First, to expose their corruption and dismantle their empire, ensuring they face the consequences of their actions. Second, to protect Jenna, to open her eyes to who these people truly are without destroying her in the process. This isn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It's about justice, and a very painful lesson. I pointed to the map. Their last-ditch effort, this waterfront development, is their Achilles heel. It's over-leveraged, under-inspected, and has the potential for significant environmental and structural issues. They're rushing it, cutting corners, because they're desperate for the cash infusion they believe it will bring. We've confirmed a few things on that front, Art. Jake interjected, his voice gruff. They bought off a couple of city inspectors, nothing too high up, just enough to grease the wheels and overlooks a shoddy work. And there's a quiet legal challenge brewing from a small environmental group about potential contamination from the old industrial site it's built on. Thorns are trying to bury it, of course. Precisely, I acknowledged. This is where we strike. Their desperation makes them predictable, and predictable enemies are defeated enemies. I turned to Sam. Sam, your task is critical. We need to create a fictitious entity. A legitimate-looking holding company, well-funded, with a clean reputation. Let's call it Phoenix Ventures. It needs to appear as a genuine, high-net-worth investment firm looking for opportunistic acquisitions in distressed real estate and development. Sam nodded, already typing. Location? Offshore, for plausible deniability. Cayman Islands, then funneled through a respectable Delaware corporation. I specified. Layer it. Make it opaque, but legally sound. The kind of setup that whispers serious money, but keeps the true beneficial owner completely hidden. This entity will be our Trojan horse. Phoenix Ventures, she repeated, a wry smile touching her lips. I like it. Symbolic. Indeed, I replied, a cold gleam in my eyes. Now, this Phoenix Ventures will approach Thorn Industries. not as an aggressor, but as their potential savior. We'll offer to acquire a significant stake in their waterfront development project, enough to give them the capital injection they so desperately crave, but with stringent due diligence clauses and, crucially, a right of first refusal on their remaining assets, should the project fail to meet certain milestones. They'll jump at it, Jake predicted. They're starved for cash. They will, I agreed. And that's where the trap is sprung. Our due diligence will be far more rigorous than they've ever encountered. Sam, you'll put together an ironclad contract. It will include clauses allowing for our independent structural and environmental assessments. We will demand full access to all internal documents, contracts with subcontractors, and communications with city officials related to the project. They will concede, believing we are simply overly cautious investors. And when they find out we've discovered their shoddy work, their bribes, their environmental cover-ups, Sam asked eyes wide. By then, I explained, it will be too late. The contract will be signed. The capital will have flowed into their accounts, giving them a false sense of security. But the terms will be clear. Any significant breach of contract, any misrepresentation during due diligence, any failure to meet regulatory standards, and Phoenix Ventures has the right to pull out, reclaim its investment with penalties, and, most importantly, acquire their stake in the project, and potentially more, at a predetermined, highly discounted price. A hostile takeover by contract, Jake mused, a slow smile spreading across his face. Brutal. I like it. It's more than that, I clarified. It's about leverage. Once we have the evidence of their fraud, their corner-cutting, their environmental violations, we can use it, not just to pull out of the deal, but to trigger a cascade of investigations, both civil and criminal. SEC, EPA, city planning commissions. And with Braden's insider trading and gambling debts, the federal authorities will be very interested. What about Jenna? Sam asked, her voice softer. She's tied to Braden now. Her name will be connected to all of this. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. That's the most painful part. She will be, but it's a necessary cleansing. She needs to see the rot for herself. She needs to understand that the bigger dreams she spoke of were built on a foundation of lies. My goal is for her to emerge from this, perhaps bruised, perhaps angry at me for a time, but ultimately with her integrity intact. She married into this, but she shouldn't have to go down with the ship. We'll find a way to make sure she's a witness, not a co-conspirator. How will she find out, Art? Jake inquired, his gaze piercing. You can't just drop a bombshell on her. I won't, I said. The plan is to expose them systematically. The financial collapse will happen first, then the regulatory investigations. The truth will trickle out, slowly, painfully. She'll start to see cracks in Braden's facade, in his parents' carefully constructed image. And when the time is right, when the evidence is undeniable, I will step in. I will show her the proof. Not just tell her, but show her what kind of men she married into. And then, I'll reveal who I truly am. I looked at both of them. This is a delicate operation. Secrecy is paramount. Until the final curtain call, no one, especially the Thorns, must suspect that Phoenix Ventures is anything other than a legitimate, if aggressive, investment fund. And they must never, ever know that I am its true owner. They'll be too arrogant to see it coming, Sam predicted, a glint in her eye. They think you're just a simple carpenter. They won't look for you in the boardroom, Mr. Henderson. Exactly, I confirmed. That's their biggest blind spot, and it's the one we're going to exploit. Get the shell company set up, Sam. Jake, continue digging for anything that gives us more leverage, especially on the environmental and structural fronts of that waterfront project. It's time to move from planning to execution. The game has begun. The quiet hum of the computers, the rustle of papers, the low murmur of conversation. It was a different kind of music in my workshop now. It wasn't the sound of creation, but of calculated destruction. And for the first time since that wedding night, I felt a grim sense of purpose, a cold, unwavering focus. The pieces were arranged. Now it was time to play. The first contact between Phoenix Ventures and Thorn Industries was a meticulously orchestrated affair. A polite, yet firm, letter of intent, drafted by Sam and routed through layers of corporate entities in Delaware and the Caymans, landed on Victor Thorne's desk. It expressed a keen interest in the waterfront development project, praising its potential while subtly highlighting the challenges that might deter less experienced investors. It was an olive branch laced with poison, and the Thornes, desperate as they were, swallowed a whole. Victor Thorne himself, his face a mask of practiced civility, met with Phoenix Ventures' lead negotiator, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate lawyer Sam had handpicked from her network. I wasn't there, of course. I was in my workshop, meticulously sanding a cherrywood tabletop, the smell of fresh wood a grounding counterpoint to the high-stakes drama unfolding hundreds of miles away. But I received hourly updates from Sam, her voice crisp with suppressed excitement. "They bit Mr. Henderson," she reported one afternoon. "Hard." Victor Thorne practically tripped over himself trying to sell us on the unprecedented opportunity. Braden was there too, trying to project an air of sophisticated confidence, but I could hear the desperation in his voice when he mentioned their aggressive timeline for closing the deal. "Did they agree to our due diligence clauses?" I asked, my focus unwavering as I checked the grain of the wood. "Every single one," Sam confirmed, a note of triumph in her voice. "Full access to all project documents, financial records, engineering reports, environmental impact statements, independent site visits, interviews with subcontractors." They balked at first, of course, citing proprietary information, but when our negotiator gently suggested it might indicate a lack of transparency, and therefore a higher risk premium, they folded. A cold smile touched my lips. "Good. The hook is set. Now reel them in, slowly. Give them just enough hope to make them reckless." Over the next few weeks, Phoenix Ventures' team, a veritable army of forensic accountants, environmental specialists, and structural engineers, all operating under strict non-disclosure agreements and unaware of their ultimate benefactor, descended upon Thorne Industries. They burrowed into every aspect of the waterfront project, uncovering layer after layer of mismanagement, deliberate deception, and outright fraud. Jake, meanwhile, continued his more covert operations. He used his contacts to subtly leak information to a few carefully chosen, mid-tier local newspapers about rumors of financial instability at Thorne Industries, always careful to keep my name, or Phoenix Ventures, out of it. The articles were vague, speculative, but enough to plant seeds of doubt among smaller investors and local creditors. The financial pressure on the Thornes was mounting. News of their aggressive asset sales, coupled with Jake's whispers, began to make waves. Their stock, already struggling, started a slow, agonizing slide. I watched it all from my hidden command center, a grim satisfaction mingled with a persistent ache in my chest. This wasn't just a game. It was a surgical strike, and the patient was my daughter's future in-laws. One evening, Jenna called me. Her voice was strained, no longer the confident, slightly dismissive tone of the wedding day. "Dad," she started, "have you heard what's happening with Thorne Industries? Braden's been really stressed. The stock is down, and there are all these rumors flying around." I feigned ignorance, my voice warm with concern. "Oh, really? I hadn't seen the news, sweetheart. You know, I don't follow the stock market much these days. What's going on?" "I don't know exactly," she sighed, frustration evident. "Braden says it's just market fluctuations, but his parents are furious. They had this big meeting with some new investors, Phoenix Ventures, I think, but now even that seems to be dragging on. He says they're being overly cautious, asking too many questions." I allowed a moment of silence to hang in the air, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes, Jenna," I said, my tone philosophical, "when people seem overly cautious, it's because they've learned from past mistakes, or they've seen enough to know when to walk away. You know what they say, where there's smoke, there's usually fire." "What does a carpenter know about corporate finance, Dad?" she snapped, the edge of her old condescension creeping back in. "This is big business. I know enough to recognize a poorly built structure when I see one, Jenna," I retorted, subtle steel in my voice that I rarely showed her. "And sometimes to understand what true wealth is, you have to watch someone else's crumble. Just remember that, before you invest too much of yourself into someone else's dreams. She didn't reply immediately, and I imagined her pondering my words, perhaps for the first time truly considering their depth beyond the surface meaning. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving me with a bitter taste. It was painful to hear her cling to her illusions, to defend the very people who were using her. But it was necessary. The veil had to be lifted, not torn. A few days later, Sam called me again, a barely contained excitement in her voice. "Mr. Henderson, we have it. The Phoenix Ventures team has compiled an exhaustive report. The waterfront project is a disaster waiting to happen. Structurally unsound foundations in several key areas, direct evidence of environmental contamination that was deliberately covered up, and numerous violations of building codes. There are also clear records of bribes paid to city officials to fast-track permits and overlook inspections. And the financial implications?" I asked, my voice as steady as granite. "Catastrophic," she confirmed. "The project is effectively uninsurable and unsaleable in its current state. Any attempt to complete it would require massive remediation, costing tens of millions, far exceeding their projected profits. And that's before the inevitable lawsuits and criminal charges for the fraud and environmental violations. Their entire company valuation is predicated on this project. Without it, Thorn Industries is essentially worthless." I closed my eyes, a sense of grim satisfaction warring with the deep sorrow for what this would mean for Jenna. This is it, I thought. The moment of impact. "Sam," I instructed, "trigger the clauses. Phoenix Ventures is withdrawing its offer. But before you do that, make sure a carefully anonymized copy of that report finds its way to a few key places: the Boston Globe's investigative desk, the EPA, and the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Let the authorities and the media do their work, and ensure our contract terms clearly state our right to acquire their stake at the predetermined, discounted price upon their breach." "Consider it done, Mr. Henderson," she replied, her voice firm. "They won't know what hit them." I hung up the phone, walked over to my workbench, and picked up a piece of rough-hewn oak. My fingers, still strong and steady, traced the grain. This wasn't about building anymore. It was about tearing down, clearing the wreckage, and perhaps eventually building something true and honest from the ashes. The first blood had been drawn. The empire had begun to unravel, and the thorns, still caught in their web of arrogance and deceit, had no idea that the simple carpenter was about to deliver the final, devastating blow. The phone call came exactly when I expected it. 2 days after Phoenix Ventures officially withdrew its offer, citing unacceptable levels of undisclosed risk and systemic mismanagement, in a highly professional, yet utterly damning letter that was already making waves through Boston's financial circles. 2 days after the first whispers of the Boston Globe investigative report began to circulate, hinting at a major expose on a prominent development project. It was Victor Thorne, Braden's father, his voice a tight, barely controlled rasp. "Henderson," he barked, skipping any pleasantries. "I need to speak with you. Immediately. About this situation with Phoenix Ventures." I let a beat of silence hang in the air, a silent assertion of control. "Mr. Thorne," I replied, my voice calm, almost leisurely. "I'm not sure what a simple carpenter can tell you about high finance. My shop hours are usually from 8 to 5. Don't play games with me, Henderson," he snarled, his patrician facade crumbling. "This isn't about carpentry. This is about my son, my family, our company. We know you had some involvement with Phoenix. Jenna mentioned your conversation. She said you knew something." "Jenna talks too much," I mused, deliberately vague. "And I only know what I build, Mr. Thorne. Strong foundations, honest materials. Nothing that crumbles under pressure. Perhaps your company could learn a thing or two from that." His enraged sputter was almost comical. "I'm coming to your house, Henderson. Now, I suggest you be there." "My house is always open to civil discourse, Mr. Thorne," I replied, a chilling politeness in my tone. "Just make sure you bring an open mind, and perhaps a few answers." I hung up before he could respond, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. They were panicking. Good. Less than an hour later, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into my gravel driveway. Braden was with his father, Victor. They emerged from the car, their faces tight with fury and barely concealed fear. Victor, impeccably dressed, but with a visible tremor in his hands, looked like a man on the verge of apoplexy. Braden, usually so self-assured, seemed smaller, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous energy. They marched up to my front door, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of my unassuming colonial home. I opened the door before they could knock. "Gentlemen," I greeted, my expression neutral. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Cut the crap, Henderson." Victor practically spat, pushing past me into the foyer. Braden followed, his eyes darting around, taking in the simple, yet tastefully furnished interior, the handcrafted furniture that filled my home. He likely recognized the quality, even if he dismissed the artisan. "My daughter lives here, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice dropping, a quiet warning in my tone. "I suggest you conduct yourselves with a modicum of respect." "Respect?" Braden scoffed, finally finding his voice, though it cracked slightly. "You expect respect when you're clearly orchestrating some kind of attack on our family. You common labor?" I turned to him, my gaze piercing. "Common labor? Is that what you call the man who built the very chair you're about to sit on, the table where your daughter eats, the foundation of her entire life, before you started filling her head with your empty promises?" I walked past them, leading the way into my study. "Sit down, gentlemen. Let's discuss this attack." They sank into the leather armchairs, their initial bluster beginning to deflate under my unwavering calm. The room felt heavy with unspoken accusations and impending revelations. "What do you know about Phoenix Ventures, Henderson?" Victor demanded, try to regain control. "What part did you play in their withdrawal?" "We had a deal, a handshake." "A handshake?" I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Mr. Thorne, in my world, a handshake means something. It means honesty, integrity, trust. Things that appear to be in short supply in your particular corner of Boston. As for Phoenix Ventures, I assure you, my involvement is limited. I hear things, of course. A man who works with his hands hears many things, especially when the foundations are cracking." "Cracking?" Braden interjected, his face flushing. "What are you talking about?" "The waterfront project is solid. It's our future." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on my desk, my eyes unblinking. "Is it, Braden? Are the foundations solid? Or are they built on contaminated land, with substandard concrete, approved by inspectors whose palms were greased with your father's money?" Their faces went white. The bluster evaporated. They stared at me, dumbfounded, exposed. How do you know that?" Victor stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "I always loved details, Mr. Thorne," I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. "Especially the ones you hide in your reports. The ones you try to bury under layers of paperwork and bribes. You thought I was just an old carpenter, didn't you? Someone who wouldn't understand the complexities of big business. You made a fatal mistake." "Your Phoenix Ventures?" Braden choked out, a dawning horror in his eyes. "No, Braden," I said, a slight shake of my head. "I'm a man who hired Phoenix Ventures. I am a man who funded their investigation. And I am the man who watched, patiently, as you and your father laid bare every single dirty secret of your so-called empire. Did you really think I'd allow you to drag my daughter into your collapsing house of cards? To use her, her name, her very future, to prop up your schemes?" Victor lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. "You ruined us. You played us for fools. And for what? Because my daughter had the audacity to seek a better life than the one you could offer her. She had the audacity to humiliate me publicly, Mr. Thorne." I corrected, my voice steel. "To call me a simple man who never achieved anything, when I have more wealth, more integrity, and more influence than your entire bloodline combined. She dismissed my life's work, my sacrifices, and embraced your hollow promises. And you encouraged it. You saw me as an obstacle, someone to be mocked, to be used." I rose from my desk, walking over to my workbench, the one laden with the Thorne Industries reports. I picked up a thick folder. "Did you really think I wouldn't know about Braden's gambling debts? His insider trading? The personal loans against company assets? Did you think I wouldn't care about the environmental damage you're inflicting on this city, the danger you're putting people in with your shoddy construction? Braden was utterly pale now, his gaze fixed on the folder. He knew. He knew I had the proof. You threatened my daughter, Mr. Thorne. I continued, my voice low and dangerous. You tried to use her as collateral in your collapsing enterprise. That, gentlemen, is a line you should never, ever have crossed. You thought I was weak. You thought I was naive. You thought I was just an old man with a hammer and a saw. I picked up a well-worn framing hammer from my bench, turning it slowly in my calloused hands. This, gentlemen, isn't just a tool for building. It's also a tool for dismantling. And sometimes, when something is too rotten to repair, the only solution is to tear it down completely and build anew. And that, Mr. Thorne, is exactly what I intend to do with Thorne Industries. And with your reputation. Their faces were etched with disbelief, fear, and a dawning understanding of the true depth of the chasm they had opened. They finally saw not the simple carpenter, but the wolf in sheep's clothing, the quiet storm they had so foolishly provoked. And in their eyes, I saw the exact moment they realized their empire, their entire world, was about to be hammered into dust. The emergency shareholder meeting called by Thorne Industries felt less like a corporate gathering and more like a public execution. The air in the grand, wood-paneled boardroom of Thorne Industries' downtown office was thick with tension, fear, and a palpable sense of betrayal. Word had spread like wildfire. The Boston Globe expose, meticulously crafted from the anonymized report Sam had leaked, had hit the stands that morning, detailing the scandalous environmental cover-ups and structural deficiencies of the waterfront development project. The EPA had announced a preliminary investigation. The SEC was rumored to be looking into unusual trading patterns. Braden and Victor Thorne sat at the head of the long mahogany table, their faces ashen, their usual arrogance replaced by a brittle defensiveness. Evelyn Thorne, Braden's mother, sat beside them, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously around the room, which was packed with anxious shareholders, bewildered creditors, and a smattering of reporters who had somehow managed to gain entry. I, Arthur Henderson, sat quietly in the back, near the door, just another concerned, if insignificant, stakeholder. My attire was the same as always, a practical, dark suit, unremarkable and blending into the background. No one paid me any mind. They never did. My eyes, however, missed nothing. I watched Victor trying to project an air of control, Braden fidgeting nervously, and Evelyn's brittle smile dissolving into a thin line of worry. I watched the faces of the smaller investors, the anger building in their eyes as the gravity of the situation became clear. My heart hammered a slow, rhythmic beat against my ribs. This was it, the moment I had been working towards, meticulously, painfully, for weeks. The culmination of a promise made years ago to Elizabeth, a promise to never let injustice stand, and a promise to myself, to my daughter, to show them all the true cost of disrespect. I saw Jenna then. She walked in hesitantly, her eyes swollen, her usually pristine appearance disheveled. She looked lost, scared. She spotted Braden and hurried to his side, taking his hand, a desperate act of solidarity. My heart ached for her, seeing her so vulnerable, so clearly caught in the crossfire. But this was a lesson she had to learn. She had to see the truth with her own eyes. Victor Thorne cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this unscheduled meeting. As you know, Thorne Industries has recently faced some challenges. Misinformation, unfounded allegations. But I assure you, we are working diligently to address these concerns. He launched into a practiced, if unconvincing, denial of the Globe's report, blaming opportunistic competitors and misguided environmentalists. He tried to paint Phoenix Ventures' withdrawal as a mere disagreement over terms, rather than a damning indictment of their operations. Braden nodded along, his eyes blank, rehearsed. Then, during a brief lull, a shareholder in the front row, a small man who looked like he'd invested his life savings, stood up. Mr. Thorne, he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "What about the rumors of financial irregularities? Of insider trading? My investment has dropped nearly 40% in the last month alone. What are you doing?" Victor's face flushed. "Those are baseless rumors, I assure you. We are fully compliant with all SEC regulations." It was then that I decided to step forward. I rose, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward the aisle. Heads turned, briefly, before dismissing me as another disgruntled small-time investor. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, clear, and carried an undeniable authority that cut through the nervous murmurs. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the room, "perhaps you could clarify something for us. Specifically, the nature of the intercompany loans between Thorne Industries and Thorne Family Holdings, LLC, and the subsequent transfer of funds from that LLC to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, shortly before the recent decline in your company's stock value." A hush fell over the room. Every eye was now on me. Victor Thorne stared, his jaw slack. Braden's eyes widened in horror. Jenna, who had just been comforting her husband, looked up, her gaze finally meeting mine across the room. She saw me not as the unassuming carpenter, but as someone else entirely. Her eyes, wide and filled with confusion, then disbelief, then dawning realization, were like daggers to my heart. Who are you?" Victor stammered, completely blindsided. "What do you know about our private accounts?" "I know enough, Mr. Thorne," I replied, my voice steady, relentless. "I know that Thorne Family Holdings, LLC was used to siphon funds from Thorne Industries, funds that were then channeled to cover Braden's substantial gambling debts. I know that Braden, in particular, was liquidating his personal shares in Thorne Industries, even as his father was reassuring investors of the company's stability. And I know that this amounts to criminal fraud, misappropriation of assets, and likely insider trading." I walked closer, stopping directly in front of the table. I looked Braden directly in the eye. "You thought you were so clever, didn't you, Braden? You thought your simple father-in-law wouldn't understand. But I always love details, especially the ones you try to bury." A ripple of outrage surged through the room. People were whispering, shouting, demanding answers. The reporters were frantically scribbling notes. And as for the waterfront project, I continued, raising my voice to be heard over the rising din. "Your solid future, Mr. Thorne. My team of independent engineers and environmental specialists discovered the true story. Contaminated land, deliberately ignored. Structural deficiencies that would make the building a death trap in a severe storm. Bribes paid to city officials to push through permits and ignore inspections. Do you deny this, Mr. Thorne?" Victor was trembling now, his face a ghastly shade of gray. Braden had buried his face in his hands. Jenna, beside him, slowly pulled her hand away. Her eyes, fixed on me, were now filled not with confusion, but with a horrifying clarity. The truth was washing over her, raw and brutal. "And allow me to introduce myself," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. "My name is Arthur Henderson. You may know me as the Simple Carpenter. But I am also the principal investor behind Phoenix Ventures. I didn't withdraw from your project because of unacceptable risks, Mr. Thorne. I withdrew because I discovered your corruption, your deceit, and your willingness to endanger lives for profit. And because you, Braden, were planning to use my daughter as a shield, to embroil her in your criminal enterprise." I pulled out a folded document from my inner jacket pocket. This document, ladies and gentlemen, is Phoenix Ventures' formal filing with the SEC, outlining all the fraudulent activities we uncovered at Thorne Industries, supported by irrefutable evidence. This is also a class action lawsuit on behalf of all defrauded shareholders and an official complaint to the EPA. I laid the document on the table, right in front of Victor Thorne. His hand reached for it, then recoiled as if burned. "You dismiss me as a man who never achieved anything great," I continued, my gaze sweeping over the Thornes, then to Jenna. "But I achieved something far greater than your hollow empire. I built an honest life. I raised a daughter I loved. And when you tried to destroy that, when you tried to corrupt her with your greed and your lies, you awakened something you should have left buried. The $33 million you thought I didn't have? It bought me the truth. It bought me the ability to expose you. And it bought me the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, the frantic clicking of camera shutters. The reporters surged forward. Victor Thorne slumped in his chair, defeated. Braden sat frozen, his world crashing down around him. Evelyn Thorne let out a choked sob. And Jenna, her eyes, tear-filled, met mine again. She looked at me, her father, the simple carpenter, now revealed as an avenging angel, an unstoppable force. The man she had dismissed, the man she had publicly shamed, was now systematically dismantling the world she had so desperately tried to enter. In her eyes, I saw shock, anger, shame, and perhaps for the first time, a glimmer of profound, terrifying understanding. The moment of truth had arrived, and the truth, as always, was far more devastating than any lie. The aftermath was swift and brutal, a corporate and personal tsunami that swept through the gilded halls of Thorne Industries and the insulated world of Boston's old money. The SEC and EPA investigations, bolstered by Phoenix Ventures' ironclad evidence, moved with unprecedented speed. The Boston Globe expose exploded into a national story, painting the Thornes as archetypal villains, arrogant, corrupt, and ultimately self-destructive. Victor and Braden Thorne were arrested within days. Charges included corporate fraud, insider trading, bribery, and environmental violations. Their assets were frozen, their reputation irrevocably shattered. Evelyn Thorne, though not directly implicated in the criminal charges, found herself ostracized, her social standing in Beacon Hill reduced to ashes. Thorne Industries, once a symbol of Boston's industrial past, was declared bankrupt. The waterfront development project, their last desperate gamble, became a monument to their hubris, a rusting skeleton of steel and concrete, a legal quagmire, its contaminated land a stark reminder of their avarice. I watched it all unfold from a distance, mostly through news reports and Sam's detailed legal updates. There was a grim satisfaction, an undeniable sense of justice served. They had reaped what they had sown, and the harvest was bitter. But the victory felt hollow, tinged with a deep, persistent ache. Justice, I discovered, didn't always bring happiness. Sometimes it just brought a different kind of pain. My quiet life, once a comfortable refuge, was now complicated. Though my identity as the mastermind behind Phoenix Ventures remained officially anonymous, whispers began to circulate. Too many people had seen me at that shareholder meeting. Too many remembered my words. The simple carpenter was no longer quite so simple, quite so invisible. The hardest part by far was Jenna. For days after the meeting, she was silent. Her phone calls, her texts, they were aimed at others, at lawyers, at friends, but never at me. I knew she was staying with a college friend, avoiding the media frenzy that enveloped the Thorne family mansion. I gave her space, understanding that she needed time to process the seismic shift in her world and in her perception of me. My heart was a bruised thing in my chest. I had wanted her to see the truth, but not at the cost of breaking her. Finally, a week later, her number flashed on my phone. My hand trembled as I answered. Dad. Her voice was small, raw, stripped bare of all the bravado and superficiality. Jenna, I replied, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. Are you all right? I shocked Sobi. No, Duth. I'm not. My life, it's a mess. Braden's gone. His parents are ruined. Everything I thought I knew, it was all a lie. I know, sweetheart. I said, the words a gentle balm. I'm so sorry you had to learn it this way. Sorry, she echoed, a flash of anger in her voice. You knew. All this time you knew. You knew they were snakes. You knew about their money, about everything. And you just watched. You let me walk right into it. You let me marry him. I tried to warn you, Jenna. I countered, my voice firm but not harsh. Not in words you would understand, perhaps. But I told you to look beyond the surface. I showed you what honest work looked like. I tried to teach you about integrity. But you were so focused on the glitter, on the bigger dreams they promised, that you couldn't see the rot beneath. And the money, Dad? She whispered, the anger replaced by a profound sense of bewilderment. $33 million? You had that all along? And you let me call you a simple man, a nobody at my own wedding? Why, Dad? Why would you do that? I took a deep breath, preparing to finally reveal the deepest, most painful secret of my life. Come home, Jenna, I said. Come to the shop. I'll tell you everything. She arrived an hour later, looking fragile and utterly exhausted. She sat on a stool in my workshop, surrounded by the familiar scent of wood and the quiet presence of my unfinished projects. She looked at my calloused hands, the hands she had dismissed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of curiosity, not contempt. After I left the Marines, I began, my voice low, recounting a story I had buried for decades. I built a life with your mother. Elizabeth was everything, my moral compass, my anchor. She believed in me, even when I was a rough-around-the-edges kid from a working-class family. I got into tech by chance, by luck, or so it seemed. But it was hard work, late nights, calculated risks. And it paid off, beyond my wildest dreams. I paused, picturing Elizabeth's face. The more successful I became, the more visible I got. And with that visibility came attention. Not all of it good. There were ruthless competitors, people who would do anything to get ahead. One of them, a man I'd outmaneuvered in a particularly aggressive takeover, decided to exact his revenge. Not on me, but on what I valued most. My voice hitched, the memory still fresh, still raw, after all these years. He arranged a message. A quel accident. It was supposed to scare me, to warn me off. But Elizabeth was in that car. She didn't survive. She died because of my wealth, Jenna. Because of the world I had built around us. Jenna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had known her mother died in a car accident, but never the true circumstances. I promised her on her deathbed that I would never let that happen again. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. I would protect you, no matter the cost. I liquidated everything I could, anonymously. I set up impenetrable trusts. I created Phoenix Ventures back then, as a shell, a fail-safe should I ever need to move assets quickly. And I became this simple carpenter. It was my shield, my penance, my way of raising you away from the kind of people who would kill for money, who would lie and cheat and destroy for status. I looked at her, my eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't let you marry him because I wanted you to suffer, Jenna. I wanted you to see. I had tried to warn you, subtly. But you had to experience the emptiness of that world, the ugliness of those people for yourself. You had to feel the sting of their deception, just as I felt the sting of your dismissal, to truly understand the difference between fleeting glamour and enduring worth. Jenna was sobbing now, deep, shuddering breaths. Oh, Dad, she choked out, I'm so sorry. I was so blind, so stupid. I was so ashamed of everything real because I wanted their approval. I wanted that life. That life was a mirage, sweetheart, I said, my voice softening. Built on sand. And now you've seen it crumble. This isn't about blaming you, Jenna. It's about you understanding. Understanding the true price of ambition without ethics. The true cost of appearances over substance. And the true value of what your mother and I tried to build for you. She got up, slowly, and for the first time in years, she walked into my arms. I held her tight, feeling the tremors of her grief, her shame, her profound disillusionment. It was a painful embrace, a silent confession of sins, a shared burden of sorrow. The ashes of Thorn Industries were still settling, but in that moment, something new, something real, was beginning to rise from the debris. The wounds were deep, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could finally begin to heal. This was my absolution and hers. Months turned into a year. The legal proceedings against Victor and Braden Thorne concluded, resulting in substantial prison sentences and the complete dismantling of their family's financial holdings. The waterfront development project remained a contentious wasteland, a stark reminder of their downfall. The dust settled, but the scars remained, visible in the altered landscape of Boston's corporate world and, more profoundly, in the lives that had been touched by the Thorns' greed. My life, too, had changed. The anonymity I had so meticulously cultivated for decades was irrevocably broken. While my direct involvement with Phoenix Ventures was never publicly confirmed, the story of the simple carpenter who brought down an empire became a whispered legend, a cautionary tale for the city's elite. People looked at me differently now, not with disdain, but with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and a healthy dose of apprehension. I was no longer just Art Henderson, the carpenter. I was Art Henderson, the strategist, the avenger, the man who had traded his silence for justice. My workshop remained my sanctuary, but its purpose evolved. I still built furniture, still found solace in the honest work of my hands. But now, it wasn't just a refuge, it was a platform. The $33 million, once a hidden burden, became a tool for profound change. I established the Elizabeth Henderson Foundation, named after my beloved wife, dedicated to ethical urban development, environmental protection, and supporting small, honest businesses in underserved communities. I funded scholarships for aspiring young engineers and architects, specifically those committed to sustainable and responsible building practices. I used my wealth to build, literally and figuratively, what the thorns had sought to destroy. My public profile, though still understated, grew. I made quiet donations, offered strategic advice to city planners, and even gave a few carefully vetted interviews, always framing my story not as one of revenge, but of principle. Wealth isn't just about accumulation, I'd tell them, my eyes steady and serious. It's about responsibility. It's about what you choose to do with it and what you choose to stand for. The deepest change, however, was in my relationship with Jenna. The initial storm of anger and pain had subsided, replaced by a fragile, yet enduring bond. She had moved out of Boston, distancing herself from the wreckage of her marriage and the social fallout. She found work at a small, non-profit environmental advocacy group in Oregon, a far cry from the glittering world she had once pursued. She called me regularly now, sharing her successes, her frustrations, her quiet triumphs. She talked about the real impact her work had, the satisfaction of making a tangible difference. She was learning to build something meaningful herself, not with wood and tools, but with passion and purpose. One crisp autumn afternoon, she came to visit. She looked different, older, wiser, with a quiet strength in her eyes that reminded me so much of Elizabeth. She spent the day in my workshop, not just observing, but asking questions, interested in the grain of the wood, the joinery, the craft. "You know, Dad," she said, running her hand over a freshly planed piece of maple, "I used to think that real power, real success, was about grand gestures, huge deals, big names. Like the thorns. But watching you tear it all down, and then, slowly, quietly build something better from the ground up, that's real power. That's real strength." I looked at her, my heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. "It's not about the money, Jenna," I said, my voice soft. "It never was. It's about knowing who you are, and not being afraid to stand for what's right, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you." She nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "And about not underestimating the simple man, right?" A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. I smiled back, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. Something like that. Sometimes, the quietest people have the loudest stories, and the most dangerous secrets. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the ventilation system and the distant chirp of birds the only sounds. The past was still there, a shadow in the corners of the room, but it no longer dominated. The pain was still real, but now there was also hope. Hope for Jenna, for the future she was building for herself, one brick at a time, away from the destructive allure of empty promises. Hope for the world, that perhaps, just perhaps, the lessons learned from the thorn's fall would resonate. I finally turned to address the camera, to address you, the listener, who has been privy to my confession, my quiet reckoning. My story is out there now. The truth, in all its complexity and all its pain, has been told. Many people believe that true wealth is about big houses and expensive cars. I say, my gaze steady, earnest. But I learned that true wealth is knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, and having the courage to protect it no matter the cost, even if it means burning down everything they thought was precious. And sometimes, to teach that lesson to others, you have to be a very, very expensive teacher. I look out, past the camera, into the quiet, fading light of the workshop. A new chapter begins, not of silence, but of purpose. And this time I won't be hiding.